Again, I'm Damon Wilson, the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council. Hope you enjoyed your lunch or conversation with your guests. We have a particular treat for you while you enjoy your dessert. We'll have the opportunity to hear from former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. We're just delighted that you're with us here in Istanbul. Thank you so much. We're particularly pleased because we have two great Americans for you over lunch today. I'm particularly delighted to have the opportunity to welcome them to the stage. First, because I've had the opportunity to work under both of them. I served in the NATO office when Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State and saw how, through her leadership, we transformed the alliance, and it was just an honor to play a small role in the part of that legacy. I also had the opportunity to work for Steve Hadley as he served as a National Security Advisor, and I worked on his Europe team. And it was an incredible honor to learn from you, Steve, as a mentor. But I'm particularly pleased that the Atlantic Council has both of them here in Istanbul, because at a time when much of the world is looking at Washington and wondering what is going on, we demonstrate that there really is a bipartisan spirit that can get things done in the United States. And I think you'll see that and hear that today from our two guests. Steve, we're particularly pleased to welcome you back. This is your third time at our Istanbul Summit. And it's, I think, a testament to his commitment not only to Turkey, but also to the Atlantic Council, but also to Turkey. The audience knows Mr. Hadley as the National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush, but he also remains one of my bosses as a member of the Board of Directors at the Atlantic Council, where he serves on the Executive Committee. And importantly for us, he's been a driving force behind our efforts to stand up the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security, where he's really been a driving force in helping us focus on channeling the Atlantic Council to focus on strategies for the United States and the transatlantic community over the long term. I think it's really emblematic of Steve that at heart he is a strategist who uniquely combines the commitment to big ideas, to vision, equally with the idea of implementation and how you execute and get these things done. So in addition to his Atlantic Council role, Steve Hadley is a principal at the RiceHadleyGates, served as the 21st National Security Advisor of the United States, and prior to that as a Deputy National Security Advisor. Steve, let me invite you to the podium to introduce our key highlight for the summit, the address by Secretary Albright.
Thank you very much, Damon. In 1997, Madeleine Albright was named the 64th Secretary of State of the United States and was the first woman to hold that office and became at that time the highest-ranking woman in the history of the U.S. government. Before that, she spent 4 years as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. She had also served previously as a member of President Jimmy Carter's National Security Council and served as Chief Legislative Assistant to U.S. Senator Edmund Muskie. Madeleine Albright is professor in the practice of diplomacy at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. She is the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers. She continues to travel around the world at a pace that I think few of us could match. I asked her, of any 30 days in the month, how many days is she traveling? She thought for a minute and she said, about 40. She picks up the dateline at least 10 times in the course of her travels in any given month. She is also either the chair or on the board of directors of any foreign policy organization you've ever heard of. So her contributions to the foreign policy of her country continue to be enormous, even out of office. She believes strongly that America has a moral responsibility to work with other countries to solve global problems, and she is a tireless advocate of American engagement in the world. She is also a passionate Democrat, and yet she believes, and I say that capital D Democrat, as well as small d, and she believes equally passionately that bipartisanship is key if the United States is going to solve the challenges we face both at home and abroad. It has been my privilege and pleasure to work with her in a number of such bipartisan efforts, and to welcome her to the stage now as a great partner and someone who has also become a great friend. Madeleine Albright.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you for telling everybody who I am, because not everybody always knows. Not long ago, I was coming back from China, and Chicago was the first port of entry, and I was there getting undressed for the security people, and I put my stuff down on the conveyor belt, and the lady behind me said, "So where'd you get all your screw-top bottles? My bottles all leak." And I told her the story, and then I was going through the magnetometer, and the TSA guard looked at me, and he said, "Oh my God, it's you." He said, "I'm from Bosnia, and we all love you in Bosnia, and if it weren't for you, there wouldn't be a Bosnia, and you're welcome in Bosnia, and can I have my picture taken with you?" So we stopped the whole line. There's a big mess, and I go back to get my stuff, and the lady of the screw-top bottle says, "So what exactly happened here?" And I said, "Oh, well, I used to be Secretary of State." And she said, "Of Bosnia?" So, Zlatko. Steve, thank you very much for everything that you said, and we have worked together on many subjects. It is my pleasure and honor to work with you, and in fact to declare our friendship, because I think, one, we really do like each other, and I think it does show what happens if people of goodwill work on difficult problems. So thank you very, very much. I'd like to congratulate everybody at the Atlantic Council for this 5th anniversary summit, and I'm really delighted to be here to talk about global challenges and prospects. Or more accurately, I'm just delighted to be back. I confess that Turkey is one of my favorite countries for its beauty, its history, and its culture, and as far as I'm concerned, Istanbul is one of the most amazing cities in the world, and as many of you know, I was born in Prague, so for me that is truly quite a statement. One of my favorite visits was 3 years ago. I'd come here with my grandchildren, and my youngest granddaughter, who was 7 at the time, enthusiastically declared, "Now I completely understand why Turkey is so special." We spent the night in Europe and had lunch in Asia. We thought about that earlier this month when we saw the coverage of Tiger Woods launching intercontinental golf balls from atop the Bosporus Bridge. But today I find myself reflecting on another trip to Turkey. It was November 1999, 14 years ago this week, when I accompanied President Clinton for his address before the Grand National Assembly in Ankara. It was a difficult time, and there had been an earthquake in August and another the week we arrived. In September, I'd visited a tent city near Izmit and seen the horrific devastation firsthand. And standing before the National Assembly, President Clinton underscored our close ties. He said he wanted to express America's solidarity with the Turkish people and to reaffirm our partnership for a common future. And then he talked about the promise and the peril we face together, very much as we are doing today, recognizing Turkey's unique role and position in the region and the world. If you'll bear with me, I'd like to read to you one passage from that address. "When we step back and look ahead," President Clinton said, "it's possible to imagine 2 very different futures over the next generation. Without too much trouble, a pessimist might foresee a dark future, indeed a Middle East with the peace process shattered, Saddam's aggression unchecked, democracy collapsed in the Caucasus and Central Asia, extremism and terror spreading across the region, more violence in the Balkans, military coups, unstoppable nuclear tensions in Pakistan and India. But there's another vision, one that requires a strong Turkey playing its rightful role at the crossroads of the world, at the meeting place of three great faiths. And he continues, it's possible to see that brighter future, one rising prosperity and declining conflict, one in which tolerance is an article of faith and terrorism is seen rightly as a travesty of faith. A future in which people are free to pursue their beliefs and proclaim their heritage, in which women are treated with equal respect, in which nations see no contradiction between preserving traditions and participating in the life of the world. A future of growing respect, said President Clinton, for human rights that protect our differences and our common humanity, and specifically a future in which nations that are predominantly Muslim are increasingly partners with nations that are not, acting in concert in ways large and small to realize the shared hopes of their people, President Clinton concluded. To me, rereading those words from 1999 is bittersweet. We can all be proud that the nightmare scenario we imagined has not come to pass. The Middle East peace process may be cracked, but it's not shattered. Democracy may be fragile in the Caucasus and Central Asia, but it has not collapsed. Saddam's aggression has indeed been checked, though Iraq remains unstable. India and Pakistan have not gone to war, and the Balkans are at peace. At the same time, the hopeful vision remains very much a work in progress. Prosperity has risen, but so has the yawning gap between the rich and the poor. Tolerance, freedom, and human rights are still far from universally achieved. Relations between Muslim and non-Muslim worlds are still too often marked by mistrust. Terrorist attacks and fatalities hit a record high last year. And when it comes to women's equality, well, just ask Malala how she feels about that. It is sobering to see just how far we still have to go 14 years later. Yet it's comforting to see how much the vision still resonates today. So when we think about global prospects, that's the future we still want to create. And now, as then, the choices Turkey makes will help determine whether or not we succeed. The problem is that our global challenges have morphed in scope and intensity. The world is being transformed by forces that touch on every aspect of our lives and the impact every country in every corner of every continent. Together, these megatrends are reshaping traditional notions of governance, diplomacy, and stability, and contributing to the profound uncertainty that grips much of the world today. I know you've already had sessions on Afghanistan and Europe and Central Asia and the Caucasus, and that later today, my friend and colleague Sandy Berger will focus on Syria and the Middle East. So I wanted to use this time to reflect on our age of uncertainty more broadly, to look at a few of the megatrends at play and how we might try to respond. The first trend is the complexity that has been born of our interconnectedness. Because the world has grown closer than ever, everything affects everything else. We used to compare diplomacy to a chess match with two people sitting quietly in their chairs pondering over their moves. Today, I kind of think it's more like pool, billiards. The game is dynamic. There are a bunch of balls sitting in the middle of the table, and somebody comes with a cue stick and hits a ball in hopes that it will get into a pocket, and in the meantime, it hits a lot of other balls. It's dynamic and horizontal. I had a Chinese student who said it actually was completely predictable, but I've never seen anybody play pool that way. The table itself has become more crowded with the emergence of new economic powers, and instead of the old system, where the agenda was determined by a few powerful governments, many states are now asserting themselves, and Turkey is obviously among them. Regional leaders are reaching beyond traditional spheres of interest. Turkey in Africa, China in Latin America, Brazil in Iran, India in Southeast Asia. No wonder then that the Atlantic Council itself has become very far-reaching. And these days, when you focus on NATO countries, it seems like ancient history. Today, your work spans the Middle East, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and more, because the stakeholders on any given issue are more diverse than ever before. But as the new relationships are being forged, some fear that long-standing relationships will fray, and that words like rebalance and pivot are simply code for thanks for the memories. We're all still learning about how to work together in a far more complex world and how to pursue new strategic interests without neglecting historic ties. And that leads me to the second trend, the weakening of the international system. Even as nations are confronted with challenges none of us can meet on our own, from climate change to terrorism to financial shocks to the threat of pandemic disease, it seems that our ability to coordinate and collaborate is breaking down. And in part, it's a function of the complexity I just mentioned. As the Atlantic Council has noted, there are 140 more countries today than there were when the global system was last reformed in the 1940s. States aren't clear about where they belong in the new global array. Should they be organized by region or level of development or type of government or strategic orientation? Does every authoritarian government get lumped into the same category, or is the enemy of my enemy my friend? And how can we expect to forge a common global agenda when families in some nations can't afford to buy bread, and in other countries, diet books are bestsellers? We're also confronted with a host of non-state actors, such as NGOs and global corporations, that operate outside government control, yet have the power to affect policy. The international system has not yet adjusted to the impact of these agents of change, and the result is a worrisome ad hoc approach to the conduct of international affairs. And we're all in the same boat, but too often it simply feels as though the world is at sea. And this sense of being unmoored can lead people to cling ever more tightly to the familiar, a group that are just like themselves, with their own kind, along ethnic or religious divides. And pride in one's identity is a wonderful thing, but not when it curdles into hatred of the other. A third trend is the devolution of power down to the very grassroots, and thanks to technology that has given billions of previously isolated people access to a universe of knowledge. On the one hand, that democratization of knowledge is truly a wonderful thing. It empowers citizens to hold their governments accountable and rural farmers to get a fair price for their crops. It expands the reach of education with innovations like MOOC, massive open online courses, through which tens of thousands of students can enroll in a single class. But greater knowledge of the wider world can breed frustration and discontent if people feel that others enjoy a quality of life that remains beyond their reach. This risk will grow in the next decades as Earth's population reaches 9 billion, straining limited resources and taxing society's ability to cope. And because we all see everything everywhere, virtually in real time, leaders will feel increasing pressure to respond to crises far from home. There's another way in which new technologies are challenging governance and stability. They've given people the means to broadcast their opinions to a worldwide audience, transforming the way the parameters of the public debate are set. It wasn't so long ago that we used to fret about our citizens becoming disengaged. And I remember a joke about asking a young person which he thinks is worse, ignorance or apathy. And the young person shrugs his shoulders and replies, "Who knows? Who cares?" But now we have the opposite dilemma. Everybody is engaged all the time. Anyone with a point of view can claim a global platform. New communities of common interests are coalescing in cyberspace around political parties, social causes, and expressions of personal identity, not to mention that great uniter himself, 19-year-old Justin Bieber, whose 46 million Twitter followers exceed the populations of Belgium, Greece, Portugal, and the Czech Republic combined. But just as the internet brings people together, so it can drive us apart. When everyone has his or her own channel customized to his or her own worldview, we risk what the World Economic Forum calls self-amplified information loops, where messages ricochet around the world in a massive echo chamber that reinforces what people already believe and reduces their openness to debate. And this feeds into a fourth megatrend, the erosion of state authority. We may be reaching a point where governments are so weakened by the diffusion of power and the loss of control over information that they're reduced to chasing public opinion instead of leading it. Now, of course, there's nothing novel or wrong about the need for national officials to find favor with their citizens, but the filters that used to moderate public opinion, such as mainstream media or centrist political parties and the business community, are less effective than they were yesterday and will be even less so tomorrow. And when information and misinformation spreads in the blink of an eye, not just to the TVs in our homes, but to the devices in the palm of our hands, the constant pressure to react to the latest headline can cause our leaders to lose sight of the long term. The result is a crisis in government caused by factionalism that begins at the grassroots and shoots up in all directions. It isn't easy for a leader whose position is always at risk to make the case for cooperation with others, nor is it possible for diplomats to negotiate on hard issues when the governments for whom they speak are too fragile to make deals. From our vantage point in Turkey, we can see these forces playing out all around us. In almost every direction, the landscape is marked by uncertainty and flux, especially in the Middle East in the wake of the Arab awakening. In some countries, unpopular regimes have fallen, but national unity has yet to be established. Progressive forces and vested interests jockey for authority and influence. In others, rulers are clinging to power by any means they can. The bloodshed in Syria has claimed more than 100,000 lives, rendered millions homeless, and spawned floods of refugees, putting enormous strains on the neighboring countries such as Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Conflict and chaos provide an enabling environment for extremists and terrorists. Lack of opportunity is breeding frustration among the region's youth. And beyond the Arab world, from the Black Sea to the Balkans to the Caucasus to Russia to Iran, Turkey's neighborhood is unsettled and at times deeply unsettling. The dynamics of the U.S.-Turkey relationships have been evolving too, as both our nations seek to find their footing in the shifting regional sands. Our interests have not always been aligned, our foreign policies not always in sync. Sometimes each of us has disappointed the other's expectations. It's no secret that the U.S. is deeply concerned about press freedoms in Turkey, and that a country we view as a vital NATO ally has even considered purchasing missile defenses from China. And Turkey and others have been equally disappointed by the United States' behavior on key issues, from our muddled approach to the crisis in Syria to the work of the NSA. But though our nations may bring different perspectives to the table, we still share key values and goals, and we still need each other as allies and partners now as in the past. So let me conclude with 3 points to keep in mind as we strive to build the future that we seek. First is that we must do all we can to support democratic institutions and ideals, recognizing that democracy building is a never-ending process, not a one-time event. Then that begins with the example the United States and Turkey set ourselves. We share a special ability to show that diverse, open, and free societies can work. For the United States, in the wake of a government shutdown that took us to the brink of default, it's clear we've got to get beyond our current state of dysfunction. If we remain paralyzed by partisanship and a drag on the world economy, our authority will be undermined and our leadership eroded. And to my friends in Turkey, with 3 elections in the next 18 months, the world's eyes will be upon you. Now is the time to consolidate and bolster democratic reforms, to shore up civil liberties, freedom of the press, and respect for minority rights. Show the world that Turkey's democratic journey is moving forward, and know that your ability to find the right balance between modernity and tradition, between government and religion, between the individual and society, and between national identity and globalization will inspire countries on every continent that are grappling with similar problems. Second, we need to repair the global system of institutions and laws, balancing the imperatives of representation and efficiency, multilateral versus minilateral approaches. There will always be tensions between global governance and the protection of national prerogatives, but collective engagement is our only hope for preventing future financial meltdowns, humanitarian crises, pandemic breakouts, and nuclear proliferation. We need to adapt our post-war institutions for the world today and reinforce them for the world of tomorrow. And that has to include Turkey's accession to the European Union and its full participation in the benefits of expanded transatlantic trade. Third, we need to ally ourselves with the rising generation, the young people on whose ingenuity and talents tomorrow depends. One of the most disheartening polls I've seen says that the United States is only 15% of adults believe today's children will be better off than their parents. Many other nations share that gloomy outlook, but we can't just accept it as fate. We owe young people the chance to go as far as their potential will take them, and we need to do so in an age when technology is transforming the workplace itself, demanding greater skills in science, engineering, and math, while making many traditional jobs obsolete. When I was in college, which was somewhere between the invention of the iPad and the discovery of fire, the General Motors Corporation was America's biggest company, employing more than 600,000 men and women. Last year, when Instagram was bought by Facebook for $1 billion, it had 13 employees. Facebook itself, which connects more than 1 billion people, only employs 5,300. If these are the high-flying businesses of the future, then where will the jobs be? These issues are especially vital in the Middle East, where, as many of you know, 30% of the population is between 15 and 29, and unemployment is painfully high. Tomorrow, in fact, I'll be speaking at the Partners for a New Beginning Summit, which aims to bring the public, private, and civil sectors together to develop a dynamic economy, one that creates opportunity for men and women region-wide. None of this will be easy, but I take inspiration from that great global statesman, Groucho Marx, who boldly declared, "I intend to live forever or die trying." That's the spirit we need to bring our work, and seeing all of you here and the discussions that we're having gives me hope. So I thank you very, very much for your kind attention, and now I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much. That was fantastic. In many respects, I think we just heard a very important address with some powerful messages. And I hope we can get into some of these themes in our conversation. In many respects, I think what we heard was the strategic framework we needed to help fit in all the various debates that we've been having on specific issues over the past 2 days. But you also laid out a very significant agenda, not just for U.S.-Turkey, but the U.S. transatlantic community. Supporting democracy, repairing the global system of institutions and laws, and to ally ourselves with the rising generation. To kick off our conversation, I wanted to pick up on, you said that Turkey's neighborhood is unsettled and at times deeply unsettling. And at the same time, you had a fairly strong call for our partnership in supporting democracy. I want to look south of Turkey and talk a little bit about the transition in the Arab world. We heard from one of our Turkish interlocutors while we were here that the failure in Egypt means the end of democratic transition in the Arab world, and that the best guarantee for Assad to remain in power. Given this burning agenda, how do you see Turkey and the United States aligning our interests, trying to work together on this set of challenges in the region, and overcoming some of the frustrations you mentioned in the bilateral relationship?
Well, I do think.
Should be.
Hello?
Yes.
I do think that it is a particularly unsettling time. And if I could say, I was in a very interesting discussion this winter with an Arab, and I said, it's the winter, so we can't call it the Arab Spring anymore. So we call it the Arab Awakening. And he got furious at me, and he said, that is outrageous. The Arabs haven't been asleep all this time. And I said, so what would you call it? And he said, Arab Troubles. And I said, what about Arab Opportunities? So in those 4 sentences, you can see the divergence in all of this. I think we have had a tendency of kind of talking about the Middle East as if it were some kind of unified region, and it is not. And I think that there are many various aspects that have to be dealt with. I worked for a president who read a lot, and he assigned books to us. And one book he said I had to read was The Peace to End All Peace by David Fromkin, which was about the creation of the modern Middle East. The short version of the book is that the modern Middle East that came after the fall of the Ottoman Empire was that the British and French bureaucracies lied to each other and set up a number of artificial countries. And I think that in many ways we are still dealing with all those lines. I think that what I personally believe that democracy is the best form of government, but it is not instant. And we have this kind of sense that it's, as I mentioned in my remarks, that it's an event and it's an ongoing process, and we expect something to happen very quickly. In order to prove the case, the United States government is going through very hard things. After 220 years, we are proving it's an event that doesn't always run smoothly. And I think that what we need to look at is how democracy and economic development go together. All of us that have gone through school endlessly know that there have been arguments about what comes first, economic or political development. They clearly go together because democracy has to deliver. People want to vote and eat. And so the issue is, when I mentioned about the unemployment, there has to be a way that the governments are able to provide employment. And we need to be a little patient with how it is going. But it is disturbing when the wrong people get elected. It sometimes happens in our country. So we have to be understand that there's always another. Yes. That there's always another election. And what is interesting, and when we were starting the National Democratic Institute, we said, what is essential? Elections, necessary but not sufficient. What is essential is the existence of an opposition party, because that provides choice to the voter and accountability of the government and governance. And so there are a lot of aspects, and I don't think we should give up. I think it's a long process. I think the countries will be better off if the people are empowered and can vote and eat.
Important message that we're in this for the long term. Steve, I think she threw the ball at you with that. I want to turn to you because you have been outspoken on issues of transition in the Middle East, on Syria in particular. Pick up on what the Secretary has said about how do we align U.S.-Turkish interests, but for the long term, where the conversation from some of our Turkish counterparts have said our objective was a democratic Syria. Now it's just the security of this country, security of Turkey. Where are we, and what should the transatlantic community with the U.S. and Turkey be doing in this region?
Well, I think one of the things you have to ask is, how do you get long-term stability? And I think there was a period of time in our history with respect to the Middle East where we thought authoritarians were just fine as long as they were our authoritarians and weren't then the Soviet Union's authoritarians. And we saw that that model turned out to be self-defeating. In the end, it not only did those governments not perform for their people, but they also turned out, in part because of that, not to be stable over the long term. And our principles, and I think they're shared by Turkey and the United States, is that over the long term, democratic governments not only conform and give a vent to the highest aspirations of the human spirit, but they also, over the long term, are more stable and provide a better life for their people. That is our belief, and that therefore, over the long term, democracy leads to a stable system. So I think what we have to do is, in the short run, deal with the kind of violence that we're seeing in Syria, get that down. But over the long term, we've got to have a strategy that allows these people to build democratic societies. Our experience is that when people who live under authoritarian states enforced by violence finally get a chance to vote, either at the ballot box or with their feet, they vote for freedom and they vote for democratic systems. We've got to believe that. We've got to have a set of principles that make those principles, democratic principles, the foundation for our foreign policy. And it should be the basis on those principles by which Turkey and the United States collaborate. And one of the opportunities I think we have is to help the states of the Middle East find their way, and they have to find their way. People have to fight and win their own freedom, but help them find their way to free and democratic systems. It's going to take a long time, but we can help out, and we should do it, and it's a great project that Turkey and the United States could take on together.
Capture a couple of questions before the audience, so we have to wrap up shortly after 3, but I want to turn north just first. I can't help but ask, Madam Secretary, you made a strong statement about Turkey's place in the European Union. We're here in the wake of a very disappointing, I think in many folks' view, of a decision in Ukraine not to take the next step in European integration. You both have played such an important role in this historic process, Madam Secretary, in opening NATO's door and presiding over Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic coming into the alliance, and Steve Hadley as a driver outside of government of the NATO Committee to expand NATO, and then working on essentially the Big Bang for both NATO and the European Union. You both have worked together hand in hand in this historic process. Is it coming to an end? Has it come too far? You mentioned Turkey-EU. There's obviously been very slow progress on that front. But are we actually seeing a rollback of this whole initiative and what may be playing out with Ukraine's decision, Armenia's decision before that, with real tactics to strong-arm countries away from making this decisive choice towards Europe?
Well, first of all, I think that we made the right decision in the first place. Europe had been artificially divided as a result of agreements made during World War II, and there were people and countries that wanted to be part of the Western united system. And I think we've done the right thing. I think what is interesting, and it has a little bit to bear with the remarks I made, is that it is clear, obviously, that the current NATO is not anti-Russian, and therefore developing a reason for its existence has been something that people have thought about. I was asked to help to chair this group of experts that were looking at a new strategic concept for NATO, and some of it does have to do with out-of-area operations. I won't go through all that, but there is a reason for having that organization. I think that the EU also, there is a reason. It's gone through some pretty hard times, and it is an example that it isn't always easy to build an organization that works. I mean, it was built on one leg, basically. And needs to have a fiscal policy, a number of the issues that we have seen. I think it is very disappointing what Ukraine did, and the EU and NATO attracts members by what is attractive about it and the principles. What the Russians are doing is forcing countries to be a part of their group, and I find that a very depressing issue. I have to say I'm very disappointed. And I hope that Moldova and some of the other, there's about to be an EU meeting, and I think that it will be very clear what a disappointing decision. I do not think the process has come to an end. I think people want to be part of a system that believes in individual dignity and economic improvements and are able to be part of a group by choice.
Also the success of the enlargement with the Big Bang, but also the challenge and failure of Bucharest to take the next step. The Bucharest summit, where Georgia and Ukraine didn't move into the membership action plan, So if you were sitting in European shoes on the eve of this summit, what next with these countries to the east?
It is obviously a disappointment what Ukraine did, and it's a big disappointment for the Ukrainian people. They're the ones, in the end, who are going to suffer from this. But again, it's being confident in our values and in our principles. I think the project that is underway in Europe today is going to be successful. It is going to lead to a better life for the people of Europe. It has provided a better life for the people of Europe, a more prosperous life. And whatever Russia is trying to construct will not, over the long term, be able to compete with that. It just won't. So I think the prescription is, and secondly, we have to recognize that countries have to be ready. As one of the panelists said this morning, Ukraine does not meet the values test today for being part of Europe. It's too bad. It's too bad that the Orange Revolution did not lead unremittingly to promised progress towards freedom, democracy, and prosperity, but it didn't. So I think it is not over, but what we have to do really is a couple things. One, Europe, the EU needs to continue to build itself, to continue to be and become a better functioning, democratically based institution that provides a better life for their people. So we've got to keep vindicating those principles by what we're building. Second of all, we should not turn our back on Ukraine. They have missed a gate, but that is simply, there will be other opportunities to outreach to the Ukrainian people and build relationships with them, and to the extent we can with this government, we ought to continue to do that. And then three, we should have confidence that at some point, the magnet that is what's happening to their west will be stronger than that's what's happening to their east, and they will come back. And hopefully, I would hope at some point, Russia itself would increasingly turn west. And I think that will happen, because in the end of the day, I have confidence in our values and principles.
Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes left, but I don't want to monopolize this. So what I might do is just take a couple of questions from the audience right now and bring them back to both the Secretary and Mr. Hadley. So Ashraf, would you like to kick off? And a colleague here. If we could have a mic right here in the front. And if I could ask folks to identify themselves and ask a brief question. Please, you're going to have to move a little bit faster. Thank you.
You can have mine.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for a tour de force. Dean Acheson described his memoirs as present at creation. We are at another age of uncertainty. That time, diplomatic imagination rose to substitute certainty, relative certainty, for uncertainty. What style of leadership do you think is necessary for today's situation? What is the role of diplomacy? And where will the practice come from?
Thank you. Let me pick up, just since we have short on time, this woman here as well. Please, your question.
Sure. Shall I go ahead? Okay. Barchi Nanch from Hurriyet Daily News. When Mr. Obama was elected for the first time, I thought he has the potential of matching Clinton's popularity in Turkey. Today, I won't be wrong to reflect that there is a disappointment in the Turkish public opinion. Now, the success of the Clinton years is that there was frank, genuine conversations between two capitals on even nasty issues as democratic deficit. Whereas today, part of the Turkish public does not understand how U.S. is turning a blind eye to certain democratic backpedaling in Turkey. So I was wondering, this is a question to Ms. Albright, whether you believe the U.S. administration has been vigilant enough in the course of the past 2 or 3 years to raise the issue of democracy and human rights. Thank you.
The final last question with this gentleman here, and then we'll come back to our stage. Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, United States and you personally gave a great support to new independent states of former Soviet Union in a very difficult time. And also, only with the support of United States, countries of Central Europe, Baltic states had a chance to Euro-Atlantic integration. But right now, we're feeling a lack of US leadership And we're feeling is that we are insecure when in a period when Mr. Putin building Eurasia Union as a new form of restoration of Soviet Union. What is possible to do a more active role of United States in European politics, in European issue, because we need it. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you that you're here in Europe.
Very much. Unfortunately, with our time, I'm going to come back to you with these 3 questions to help wrap up our conversation. Madam Secretary, please.
Simple questions. Let me just say, in some ways, they do all fit together, which is that I do think, as I said in my remarks, that we are living in a particularly complex time in terms of, and I don't want to blame everything on new technology, but it has something to do with what is going on. It has disaggregated a lot of voices. Channels of communication are political. What I say often is that governments these days, people are talking to their governments on 21st century technology. The governments are listening on 20th century technology and giving 19th century responses. So the whole kind of system is out of kilter. I think also there are issues to do with economic viability. When President Clinton left office, we had a balanced budget, in fact, a surplus in the budget, and if I might say so, a surplus of goodwill abroad. Some of that disappeared. I won't go into why. But the bottom line is that President Obama inherited a pretty tough story in terms of many ways. I think that what is an issue, and it has to do with American leadership, is I think in some ways, and I'll say this if you're America, you're damned if you do or damned if you don't. We are often accused of interfering in everybody's internal affairs, and when we aren't doing something, then people say, where are you? President Clinton said it first, but I said it so often it got identified with me. We are the indispensable nation. But there is nothing in the definition of indispensable that says alone. And so some of what has to do, Ashraf, is that basically we are looking for institutional structures where we can cooperate with other countries in partnership. Americans don't like the word multilateralism. It is too many syllables and ends in an ism. But the bottom line is it's just a matter of partnerships. And I think that what has to happen is that the organizational structure that we have can't just depend on a few big countries, but requires that kind of partnership. And we keep searching for new organizations, the G20 or whatever. And one of the remarks in my speech was, people don't know whether you were organized. When I was at the UN, there was still the non-aligned. And I said, what are you non-aligned between? And so there are definitional aspects of where we are going. I think that President Obama has found himself in and it goes to your question, in terms of trying to deal with some of the issues in the United States, trying to finish up what has happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he does, in fact, dedicate himself to democracy and development. But there is a concern that you can't militarize democracy. You can't impose democracy. That is an oxymoron. And what you have to do is try to speak to the people in the country and be supportive of the democratic movements that are taking place there. I happen to believe that the United States does need to lead with others. I do think, as Steve has been saying, our value system is not just an American value system. It is one that follows the United Nations Charter, which is the basic dignity of every human being. And I also believe that we are all the same, that everybody is ready for democracy. You can't just say there's a group of people that aren't ready for democracy. And so I think that that has to be the message, but it's a tough one to deliver. And it is a tough one to carry out at a time where there is partisanship in the United States. I think we have a lot of fun kidding each other, but the bottom line is we do look at issues in a similar way and do believe that the solutions come from bipartisan cooperation and discussion, and not deciding that just because the other person is from a different party, that they are idiots or don't have the interest of the United States. And so Steve and I travel around a lot together and work together a lot in order to prove that neither of us is an idiot.
Secretary, that embodies the mission and the approach of the Atlantic Council. We couldn't be more delighted to have you both here together. Steve, any reaction to the final questions, final comments?
No, I think the Secretary said it very well. The United States needs to continue to be engaged. That's an issue at home, and Madeleine and I together are arguing strongly for U.S. engagement. Secondly, we need to be engaged, we need to lead, but to do it in a different way that recognizes there are new players and that they all need to be brought together to try to solve problems, many of which are global and affect us all. Three, we're also going to have to, as one of the institutions that needs to be redesigned is in some sense the national security system of the United States. We're basically using the same system that Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski put together 40, 50 years ago. And we are now in a situation where it's largely overwhelmed by crisis. And if all you deal with crises, all you will have is future crises. And what we need to do is, while we handle the crises, find a way to put in place the kind of policies that look out 3 or 4 years and that will defer the crises of the future. We don't do that very well in the U.S. government. We need to find a way to do that within our government and then lead an international dialogue to try as a whole to put in place the kinds of policies that will allow us to get through the problems we face and head off crises in the future. It's a big order, but like every big order and big challenge, it's a huge opportunity for all of us.
Secretary, Mr. Hadley, it has been such an honor to host you here. What you've heard from these two individuals, it really does embody, I think, the Atlantic Council approach of how do you foster, galvanize U.S. leadership and engagement in the world, working hand in glove with our partners and allies on sustainable foreign policy solutions, which means they have to enjoy bipartisan support in Washington. We've just heard that from this stage. We couldn't be more proud to have hosted you here at our Istanbul Summit. In fact, both of you are veterans of the summit. We're delighted of your commitment, and we look forward to having you back in the future. I think you add such a special element to our conversations here. So thank you very much for being with us today.